Hello, welcome to the Instructional Leadership Pathways LASO 3 State Approved Provider List Application webinar. In particular, we're going to be talking about the guidance document and application details to be Instructional Leadership Pathways Provider as a part of LASO 3 following ESF diagnostics for school improvement campuses. All right. So I'm going to introduce myself first, then pass it over to my colleague, Jeff. My name is Chris Bargo. I'm the Director of Instructional Leadership Coaching. I have some great, exciting projects that I get to work on, including working with our vetted improvement programs and together with School Improvement on the Effective Schools framework. And I'm going to be talking to you today about the instructional leadership pathways and some of the thinking behind that. And I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Jeff to introduce himself as well.
Hi, my name is Jeff Heffler. I am the director of One System Special Project. I work in the facilitation of the LASO grant, as well as approved provider relations within that LASO grant and some broader grants and planning consolidation across the agency and across the state. Today, we'll be looking into our instructional leadership pathway approved provider refresh. So we'll start off, we'll talk a little bit about the purpose behind this refresh, as well as some broader information regarding LASO's Cycle 3 grant bundle that we'll be launching this fall. We'll cover the portfolio, we'll cover the timeline, and some explanation of the pathways that we have coming. Then we'll dive in a little bit deeper into some details of our provider refresh, including some eligibility, assurances that'll be required, some training requirements, metrics of evaluation, as well as the application evaluation processes, some of the supports and guidance documentation that we've assembled for this process, as well as a timeline and some immediate next steps.
Right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about why a vendor refresh and why instructional leadership pathways. So starting with why LASO and why move ESF focused support grant capacity building under LASO and moving to these instructional leadership pathways. So first off, in the past, LEAs have applied to grant funding for school improvement in multiple locations, such as the ESF Focused Support Grant, other school improvement grant sources, and LASO as well. In addition, vendors would apply to these different grant pathways and then would be completing multiple applications, interfacing with multiple teams at the agency for these different grants. And so moving this school improvement and instructional leadership pathways provider list to LASO really provided the opportunity to streamline the experience for our LEAs and streamline the experience for our vendors. The second point about why the instructional leadership pathway bundles, which we're going to talk about in this webinar more at length. Here you see an image of the Effective Schools framework levers, where you have strong school leadership and planning really being the foundation. That's lever 1. Levers 2, strategic staffing. 3, positive school culture. Lever 4, high quality instructional materials and assessment. And lever 5, effective instruction, come together to form really our framework for what systems and practices effective schools are implementing in Texas. And so thinking about these pieces, we have noticed that when a campus is implementing multiple systems aligned to the ESF at the same time, we see a lot more traction in student achievement and student impact. Therefore, rather than continuing to support capacity building that's really focused on maybe just one of these areas, such as observation and feedback under effective instruction, or just school-wide culture and routines under positive school culture, we have really seen the impact where multiple of these systems are being implemented and schools are focusing on capacity building in multiple of these at the same time. So therefore, whereas we're going to talk about the instructional leadership pathways evolution in our capacity building support, we're really allowed for more comprehensive system building across school improvement campuses.
All right, before we dive into this refresh process, we did want to just give a brief introduction for those that may not be familiar with the LASO Cycle 3. LASO is short for learning acceleration support opportunities. And this is a bundle of 10 unique grant programs that typically go out in the fall. This year, we are on pace to have approximately $162 million in services and supports going directly through TEA to LEAs in services and supports. And this will be through a single application that really our guiding star here, our guiding North Star is to reduce LEA administrative burden, to allow them access to state and federal resources that are going to help their students without having to put in hours and hours on multiple different applications, multiple different timelines. We are streamlining these supports into a single informal, discretionary, competitive application process. For our Cycle 3, launching in the fall and winter of 2024, we will be focusing on 3 primary learning acceleration strategies. We'll be focusing on curriculum and instruction. We will be focusing on more time dedicated to learning, as well as for innovative school models. In order to support these 3 learning acceleration strategies, we have 10 different grants that we will be featuring within our LASO Cycle 3 portfolio. We will feature for today, our focus is going to be on the instructional leadership pathway that falls under our curriculum and instruction support. For our instructional leadership grant, we are actually going to have, in order to have a unified menu for curriculum and instruction, we're offering 4 different pathways for LEAs. Our first pathway is going to be strong foundations. This has been a part of LASO through both Cycle 1 and Cycle 2. For LEAs to prepare for this, they would engage with strong foundations planning, they would engage with the effective district framework, they would engage with the effective schools framework, and then make their pathway choice of possibly strong foundations year 1 and year 2. And really our focus for today is going to be pathways 2, 3, and 4. These are our instructional leadership pathways. We'll get into more details on these here in just a moment. And with that, I will pass this back to Chris.
All right. So before I get into some of the specifics of those instructional leadership pathways Jeff just overviewed for you, I just want to talk about some of the opportunities here in terms of alignment between school improvement, strong foundations, and instructional leadership. And so some of the opportunities with these pathways and integration into LASO is one, this supports LEAs in terms of seeing their options and gaining clarity in terms of what strategies, what school improvement strategies rather they might pursue. Strong foundations is one option to support the adoption implementation of Texas OER and instructional leadership, which can support OER, other HQIM approved products as well as instructional leadership systems broadly, such as observation feedback, data-driven instruction, school-wide culture routines. So thinking about school improvement 2.0, some of the biggest strategies and priorities there involve intensive high-quality instructional material support, as well as other instructional leadership supports, as I mentioned earlier. And so this really provides an opportunity to really concentrate LEA focus as well as vendor focus to provide supports that are aligned to those areas. And last but not least, this move to a multi-instructional leadership and or ESF practice implementation allows districts to really focus on how all their systems come together. And we hope also really puts the center on how all these pieces working together, including HQIM adoption and implementation, really will accelerate student impact. And so with that, these curriculum and instruction pathways, instructional leadership pathways. Let me talk about the 3 that are most pertinent here. And so, starting with what are these pathways? Pathway 2, 3, and 4. So first, we're calling Pathway 2 and 3 the Complete Instructional Leadership Package. When we say Complete Instructional Leadership Package, there's really four contents or instructional leadership systems that are really included in that Complete Instructional Leadership Package. That includes school-wide culture routines, high-quality instructional materials, internalization and implementation, observation and feedback, as well as data-driven instruction. We've tagged the essential actions from the Effective Schools framework that are aligned to each of these instructional leadership systems or contents. So for example, school-wide culture routines is most closely aligned to 3.1. And if you go a bit deeper under 3.1, it's especially aligned to the second key practice, which is about, in particular, developing systems of routines and expectations for students. We'll go a bit deeper into some of the language of the key practices in a few following slides. So you can see on this table in the bottom here, the essential action alignment to each of these instructional leadership systems. There, in addition to pathways 2 and 3, there's also pathway 4, which is a refinement and a bit of a deeper focus where high quality instructional materials, internalization, implementation might not be a focus of a particular SI campus, perhaps because they've already adopted and implemented a set of materials. In that case, this pathway 4 just focuses on observation feedback and data-driven instruction. So there's essential actions included in lever 5. School-wide culture routines may or may not be relevant for pathway 4, but that, again, that can be applied for as an add-on. So as you're applying to be a provider for these instructional leadership pathways, you'll apply for pathways 2 and 3 or 4. You might be asking, what's the difference between pathway 2 and 3? I'm going to get to that in the next slide. All right, so getting a bit deeper into some of those explanations of the 3 pathways. Pathway 2 is a 2-year capacity building program that provides LEAs and school improvement campuses training, ongoing implementation support, and coaching on the essential actions I just outlined on the prior slide, 3.1, 4.1, 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3. However, Pathway 2 includes product training from the high quality instructional materials publisher included in their funding allotment. From a vendor perspective, an instructional leadership vendor perspective, Pathway 2 and 3 are essentially the same. Pathway 3 is the same as Pathway 2, the 2-year capacity building program focused on those set of systems. However, they may not engage with an HQIM publisher for product support. They would still have a set of adopted materials, but they, for whatever reason, would not need or would not participate in product support and product onboarding before starting their engagement in the instructional leadership pathway. Pathway 4, as I mentioned earlier, has less systems in particular. It's mostly focused and centered on observation feedback and data-driven instruction. So essentially a focus on lever 5. There could also be a smaller extent 3.1 since classroom management is touched on in 3.1. However, the school-wide culture routines lever or systems can also be added on to Pathway 4. And so when you apply to Pathway 4, you'll in particular be looking at observation, feedback, and DDI, and optionally can also apply for alignment with school-wide culture routines. If you are approved provider for Pathway 2 and 3, you would also be approved for Pathway 4 since Pathway 2 and 3 are comprehensive. Lastly, if you're wondering where Pathway 1 went, again, as a reminder from the prior slide, that's LASO Strong Foundations Implementation Grant. And more information on that will be provided in the fall. All right. So as I mentioned earlier, I promised I would go through some of the ESF language as it relates to these instructional leadership systems. So some of the ones I want to call out here are, at a minimum, each content or systems that you'll be supporting LEAs with in the instructional leadership pathways must at least address these following key practices. If your support addresses additional key practices in those levers, that is fine. These, at a minimum, are the ones that we're going to be looking for. So for school-wide culture routines, in particular, we're looking for capacity building that supports staff to implement clear-wide procedures and provide opportunities for practice that ensure safe and efficient student transitions and gatherings. For high-quality instructional materials, internalization, implementation, in particular, we're looking for when instructional materials have been adopted and or provided to teachers, and campus leaders provide the resources, training, and support for teachers to implement adopted instructional materials through internalization protocols, teacher planning time, and monitoring the rigor of taught lessons. Looking then at observation and feedback, as well as data-driven instruction. For observation feedback, this is every key practice, in particular in Essential Action 5.2. So this would involve campus instructional leaders using established tools and processes to conduct observations, capture trends, and track progress over time. Campus instructional leaders would then determine the frequency of observations based on teacher needs and student results on formative assessments. Campus instructional leaders would lead observation debrief conversations as soon as possible, usually within 2 to 3 school days of an observation, and focus on the implementation of high leverage goals and action steps. And then lastly, under observation feedback, the observation debrief conversations feature follow-up on prior goals and action steps, models, and opportunities to practice. Lastly, data-driven instruction is this last system I'll mention in this section. Campus leaders facilitate a consistent process for teachers individually and in professional learning communities to analyze data, identify trends in student misconceptions, and determine the root cause as to why students may not have learned a concept and create plans to respond. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about eligibility to apply for this opportunity. And so to be eligible to apply for this LASO grant support as a capacity builder for instructional leadership pathways, providers need to meet the following criteria. First off is to be currently approved for a vetted improvement program aligned to the Effective Schools framework as of summer of 2024. We have not yet decided about opening up this opportunity to additional vendors not currently approved as VIPs or vetted improvement programs in the future. However, we would update you all as soon as we would be ready to open another application if so. But for this first round of the instructional leadership pathways, this opportunity is only open to current VIPs. Next, as I mentioned earlier, to be eligible, you have to show capacity building alignment to those particular ESF aligned essential actions and key practices. As I mentioned, those are 3.1, 4.1, and then 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3. Some other things we're going to be looking for is demonstrate your demonstration of robust tools to support LEA implementation of the ESF practices with fidelity. We're going to be looking at the support you provide as a comprehensive professional development that includes these 3 components of job-embedded professional development. That includes face-to-face training, coaching, and implementation support. And then we're also looking to see if you have a track record of impact on student achievement. Eligible respondents could be nonprofit organizations, institutions of higher ed, as well as private or public companies. All right. Some other things to consider with eligibility is that as we're reviewing responses, if they only address part of the requirements of a document or what's being asked, that that particular response might end up being considered non-responsive or thus not eligible. All providers can be subject to future recertification. So if the TA determines that we might need to take another look at our list of providers and the criteria for in which they've been selected, that can always be a recertification process initiated. And last but not least, as we do review applications, it's important to, again, consider as it relates to as specific as you can be to share how your alignment here. You've already been vetted. If you're applying to this program, you've already been vetted as a VIP. So we've already taken a look at the services you provide. That being said, we are still looking for specific information to ensure alignment to these particular instructional leadership pathways. Okay, the next thing I'm going to go over are the assurances. All of these are going to be included as well in the guidance document, as well as all the other pieces like eligibility that that we've talked about so far. And I've bolded here on this slide and the following slide some assurances that I wanted to voice over in a bit more depth. So the first one I'm going to dig into a bit more is approved providers must complete all required TEA trainings by set deadlines where applicable and show mastery of TEA defined competencies prior to delivering collective learning series or programming to school systems. In particular, with this assurance, some of the key things I want to pull out is that we're going to have two conferences. There'll be virtual conferences a year where we'll talk about important elements like how you might set up your training over the 2 years, aligning to the effective schools framework, as well as any evolutions in school improvement that might be relevant. In terms of delivering collective learning series, you'll be delivering the programming that you are sharing with us in the application that this is the program you've designed and are implementing. And so there's not going to be centralized content that we are saying you must present it exactly this way. We're going to be vetting you as a part of this application process for how you approach the development in alignment with the ESF, as well as showing us the outcomes that you've achieved. So I wanted to clarify that assurance. The second one is providers must share progress monitoring deliverables to the TEA, as well as the following bullet, provide relevant timely progress data to both TEA and LEAs in the format requested by TEA. We'll be checking in with approved providers one to two times over the course of the year, in addition to those two virtual conferences I mentioned. In these check-ins, we'll go over progress monitoring deliverables, as well as what you're seeing for LEA fidelity of implementation of your programming, as well as potentially student data, teacher data, potential leader data in terms of what you're seeing them implement. So those will be a part of those conversations, but we may ask for information at other times throughout the year. Lastly, on this page, the last bullet I'd like to go through is just agreeing to ensure that all your trainings are in alignment with the effective schools framework, instructional leadership pathways, as well as TA's overall vision and strategic priorities. And that, again, are those instructional leadership systems or contents that I mentioned earlier. A key assurance is going to be that your trainings continue to be aligned to those. So we're going to be vetting your applications for that alignment. And then as you are serving LEAs in the field as a provider, to continue to ensure that your training maintains that alignment. Okay, and on the next page is a few more assurances. And I'm going to go into a bit more depth in the last four. So thinking about how you structure your support packages, we know that vendors can set up their packages a number of different ways that result in different levels of support, different pricing as a result of the amount of touch points that you might have with an LEA. So where we'd like to put a stake in the ground is, at a minimum, instructional leadership pathway packages must include at least 10 in-person professional development days, 8 coaching visits, as well as 8 implementation support visits annually. One long visit could potentially include multiple of these. So for example, a full day visit could include professional development plus a coaching session plus an implementation support check-in. There's flexibility there, but I want to clarify that we're looking for, at a minimum, this number of visits with the leaders that you're supporting. Next, at a minimum, instructional leadership pathways address these following key practices. In your guidance doc, you'll see these outlined again in the purpose section of the document. These notations here, numbers, are really just referring to the key practices I highlighted for you a bit earlier, which is 3.1.2, 4.1.3, 5.2.1, 5.2.2, 5.2.3, 5.2.4, and 5.3.2. Next, all providers must provide at least a minimum instructional leadership package price for their services within the allotted grant amount. So we are still determining some of the final details of the grant amount. For example, what that final amount will be and what the minimum percentage an LEA must spend on those services must be. But wanted to flag that similar grant funded packages have historically ranged from 60 to 100,000. And what we just asked, because you can have a package that's more expensive, and if the LEA wants to opt for that and supplement with local funds to go beyond the grant, that is something you can negotiate with an LEA, and it would be a decision you and the LEA would make. However, we ask that if you're on this provider list, you at least have a package that would fall into the grant amount, which has historically been within that range. Lastly, thinking about timeline and thinking about the rhythm of development over the course of the year, we are asking that initial face-to-face professional development with LEAs should be completed by August, with coaching and implementation support visits beginning by September. Um, if any factors, either with the LEA or with your own calendar to provide professional development, come in the way of that, you would need to let us know that as soon as you are aware of it, since it's very important, we feel, over the summer to finish that face-to-face professional development and then to kick off coaching and implementation, ideally by September. Training requirements. So earlier, you noticed in the assurances that there are some training requirements over the course of the year. These are very similar to the training requirements of vetted improvement programs approved for the ESF Focus Support Grant. You can expect that there'll be a winter conference, potentially in January or February. That's one full day of professional development that'll be essentially focused on topics related to proper delivery and alignment with agency strategic direction of the instructional leadership pathway packages. Then there's another one in the summer, usually in July, and this will overview important developments and considerations as it relates to these instructional leadership packages, such as developments in school improvement. Lastly, similar again to vetted improvement programs and ESF Focus Support Grant, there'll be 1 to 2 check-ins over the course of the year, really just to discuss progress in LEAs implementing components of your program. All right, metrics. Approved providers must be able to perform essentially training in their duties that will impact these pieces. So these are the metrics that we'll be looking at end of year to essentially see your impact in LEA. So first and foremost is growth in STAR results. In particular, we're thinking about growth in Domain 1 results for campuses receiving instructional leadership pathway support year over year. After that, campus level implementation of the ESF the effective school framework, the ESF's practices, as measured by a fidelity of implementation checklist or tool. Essentially, we're currently working on a fidelity of implementation tool that's closely aligned to those key practices from the ESF that I outlined earlier. As we look through, of course, your materials, and if you're approved as a vendor, we have already said your tools and your approach is aligned to these tools. So there's not necessarily a worry that you'd be misaligned if approved. However, we'll share this tool with you when it's developed so that you know when the TEA school improvement team is potentially taking a look at implementation of the ESF on campuses. That's the tool they'll use. Lastly, we'll continue to look at LEA stakeholder feedback measured by a TEA administered satisfaction survey to see how your support is landing with district and campus leaders. All right, so I'm going to talk about the application process a bit for the next couple of slides. So first off, aiming to launch the application, of course, July 23rd. The deadline for submission of materials is August 14th at 5 p.m. Central Time. Any materials submitted after this date won't be accepted. We're going to cut it off at that date to start organizing and pulling materials for review. Submission, we ask that it's signed off by director level or above lead partner level of the organization. That ask really stems from just ensuring that the leaders of the organization are fully aware that you're applying for this particular pathway. And then also to ensure that applications are concise and relevant, please limit each document upload to 10 pages. That doesn't mean your whole application is 10 pages, but each component of your application that you upload, we ask that that has a 10-page maximum, with PDF being the preferred format. Just very easy to upload and to manage PDF format. All right, and getting a little bit into the evidence and some of the documents we're looking for. One of those is fidelity of implementation tools. Of course, mentioned earlier, we are developing our some FOI tools related to the ASF language, but as a capacity builder in delivering your job embedded professional development, we'd love to see the fidelity of implementation tools that you do use or will use. as a part of delivering instructional leadership pathways. Next, program history and training support and aligned artifacts. These sections are very similar to the original vetted improvement program application aligned to the former ESF focused support grant. These sections are essentially looking for what are the LEAs and campuses that you've worked with in the past, and what is your and how long have you worked with them? What support did you give them? We're looking for that list of LEAs as well as contact information of who we might be able to reach out to potentially to ask about their experience working with you. And this aligned artifacts piece is really your opportunity to show alignment to those different instructional leadership contents or systems, such as school-wide culture routines and high-quality instructional materials internalization. All right. And then these last two pieces to highlight in the application process is evidence of program results. We are curious to see, to especially see LEAs you worked with and impacted over the past 4 years. Though if you have data and want to share data further back than that, that is admissible as well. But looking at in particular for tier 1 evidence, so STAR year-over-year growth for campuses and districts you worked with is great, but then also formative assessment growth as well as fidelity of implementation and formative assessment data would also be great things to submit here. And then the last piece is if there are any potential conflicts of interest, this part of the application would also be a place you can indicate that and should indicate that. All right. So looking at the evaluation process, I'm going to just outline essentially some of the things we're going to be looking for and some things that'll be on our rubric for evaluation here. So all the Qualtrics surveys that you complete as a part of the application submit to us will be evaluated on the following criteria. So of course, this is the key piece of eligibility that you're a current ESF aligned VIP. So first and foremost, that's going to be the first thing we're going to confirm. Second, we're going to be looking at alignment to the effective schools framework, and in particular, the essential actions I've mentioned earlier, 3.1, 4.1, 5.2, 5.12 in extent as it supports 5.2 as well as 5.3. We're going to be looking at the scope of your training, including the duration and cadence of your program and who the target audience is. When I say target audience, we specifically are looking for impact in coaching at the principal, supervisor, or principal level. If you coach additional levels within a district or campus, you can let us know that as well. But we at least are looking for coaching at one of those 2 levels. Job embedded professional development that includes face-to-face training, coaching, and implementation support, and what the essentially your plan for your number of visits and in packages looks like. As I mentioned earlier, fidelity of implementation, progress monitoring tools, evidence of program impact, as well as your ability to commit to joining our trainings and progress check-in. So essentially, the evaluation process is all of those components and criteria that we've mentioned throughout this webinar as well. One last thing I'll name here before we go to the next slide is if at any point we feel like we just don't have enough information to rate on a certain one of these criteria, we may reach out, and we ask that within 2 business days you follow up with additional information if we do reach out with that request.
All right, I'm going to take over for just a moment here and speak a little bit to the guidance document we will be releasing on July 23rd at the launch of our application window. This guidance document is the key source for all relevant information, including everything that's been presented on this webinar and then some. So this will be your primary resource to be able to see the objective and purpose of our program, our eligibility notes, the assurances that will be required for participation, our scoring evaluation process, requirements for necessary trainings involved in being a provider, the metrics for outcomes that will be a result of your training's implementation, as well as the application process and timeline and some conflict of interest and disclosure statements. Again, this will be all in a singular document, similar to the program guidelines of a grant application. This is our one-stop resource to have all necessary information. This will be available along with an application link to our Qualtrics survey and some supporting relevant materials on the LASO State Approved Provider List website beginning on July 23rd. Before we wrap it up here, we would like to name a couple of next steps that will be a part of our process. As we've named, our application window will open up Tuesday, July 23rd through August 14th, and all necessary materials, including the application survey link, the guidance document, a copy of this webinar, as well as the supporting deck, will be published on the LASO SAPL website on July 23rd. If you have any questions about this, if they are questions concerning the program content, they will be sent to vetted improvement programs at tea.texas.gov. And if you have more technical support questions of the application itself, please reach out to SAPL, S-A-P-L, at tea.texas.gov. If you're not certain where your question is most applicable, please feel free to reach out to both of those accounts, and we'll be sure to connect you with the most appropriate resource.
Right, and as we wrap up, just wanted to again thank you for the work you do supporting district leaders and campus leaders and developing instructional leadership systems. And we also appreciate the work you've done as vetted improvement programs, and also appreciate you pursuing this opportunity and looking forward to seeing your applications to be instructional leadership pathway providers.